The death toll from airstrikes by the Israeli military on Gaza in the last 24 hours has risen to at least 70. That's according to officials from the Gaza Strip's Hamas-run health ministry. The latest deaths comes as negotiators begin a new push for a ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas. Representatives from both sides are meeting in Doha for talks moderated by the US, Egypt and Qatar.
Smoke and rubble is all that remains after an Israeli airstrike in Gaza City. Over a dozen people were sleeping in this home when the bombs fell. A neighbor described what happened.
At around 2 a.m. we were woken by the sound of a huge explosion, and we were surprised to find out that it was the house of our neighbors, the Al-Ghula family. It was filled with people. Around 14 or 15 were staying there. Most of them are women and children. They're all civilians. There is no one there who shot missiles, nor is anyone from the resistance. They're our neighbors, and we know them well.
The bodies of the slain on their way to the local hospital. As their friends and neighbors prepare them for their final farewell, they join mourners throughout Gaza, like here in Han Yunis, where the funerals for the city's latest casualties in the war between Hamas and Israel were held on Saturday. As mourners offered prayers for the dead, some made a plea for peace.
We don't want any wars, we just want peace. Why can't we be like all the people of this world, like Europeans and Arabs? I swear we want peace, we're civilians.
Meanwhile, Israel released footage purporting to show the IDF capturing an enemy complex in northern Gaza. Israel has vowed to press ahead with its ground offensive until Hamas is destroyed. But the militants have repeatedly regrouped in areas where Israeli forces withdraw. As the violence continues to exact a heavy price on Gaza's civilian population, representatives from both Hamas and Israel are meeting in Doha, but it's unclear if there's a path to a lasting ceasefire.
Right, let's bring in Oliver McTernan. He's a conflict negotiator and co-founder and director of the charity Forward Thinking that works to promote a peace process in the Middle East. Welcome to you, Oliver. I wonder, as ceasefire talks have again resumed, do we know what the stumbling blocks are? Do we know actually how far apart they are from reaching peace?
Well, I think the real problem is the intention. And right from the very beginning, I have seen no indication that Netanyahu's intention of utterly destroying Hamas, and as we see in the process, destroying Gaza, has changed. I mean, he may have given permission for people to go to Doha now to resume talks, but his language remains the same, and his language is intent on destruction. Now, for me, as someone with a little experience in negotiation, it seemed to me totally incompatible. On the one hand, saying, I want to negotiate, I want the release of the hostages, and at the same time, my intent is to destroy you, and I've reiterated that again and again. So I'm afraid I'm not hopeful of this new event or round of talks in Doha.
Yeah, for many people, it's hard to fight that cynical view that I thought was a cynical view, Oliver, that both sides are not particularly wholehearted in their willingness to give any real ground in these negotiations. So you understand such cynicism as we hear a lot that we're hoping for peace here?
Well, Anthony, as I understand, nothing basically has changed since May, when Biden, way back last year, announced the conditions. There was a permanent ceasefire, Israeli withdrawal from Gaza, people being able to return to their homes in the various parts of Gaza where they're being forced out of. And then the serious exchange, and that leading to a permanent, as I say, ceasefire. That was the basis. Now, I understand that in the course of time, that variations on that have happened, that there's been concessions, that the permanent ceasefire went to 42 days, that the withdrawal could be at different stages. All of this But the complaint that I keep hearing is that at the end of the day, it's Prime Minister Netanyahu who effectively is in charge of these negotiations. He is said to have always changing the conditions at the last minute and therefore preventing it. And I think that fits perfectly his stated intention of continuing the war.
So as we seek to look for some sort of silver lining or something on the horizon that might change anything about these negotiations, Oliver, how does Donald Trump becoming president in 2 weeks' time factor into these negotiations, or this whole landscape of seeking for peace? Does it change anything? Is there an increased pressure, perhaps, to bring this ceasefire over the line before he takes office?
Well, up till now, I think the Biden administration has dressed itself up as American administrations tend to do in principle, you know, that we're all about principles, where in fact American policy always has been about interests. The one thing about Donald Trump, whatever we think of his political views or his values, the one thing about him, I think he is very clear, is transactional. And therefore, I think Trump will make it very, very clear that he will be driven by interests. Now, if Saudi Arabia hold firm to their commitment that if a Palestinian state is established, if occupation ends, then they will begin to normalize with Israel. I think that is a big motivating factor for Trump to say, let's have a ceasefire, let's have a genuine end to this, and let's move towards the conditions where we can have normalization, stabilization in the region, because that effectively is in American interest, it's in the economic interests of America, and I think that'll be a major driving factor for Trump.
Conflict negotiator Oliver McTernan, it's been great to tap your many years of experience on the matter. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Anthony.
Journalist Kareem Hari is following the story from Cairo. Kareem, great to see you. So the UN Human Rights Chief has warned of possible war crimes around the destruction of the healthcare system in Gaza. Could you tell us more?
Well, we had in the last days more aggressions against hospitals, especially in the northern Gaza Strip. On Friday, Israeli troops surrounded the Indonesian hospital in Beit Lahia in the north of the Gaza Strip. There are reports about evacuation orders around the Al-Auda hospital in Jabalia, also in the north. And a few days ago, the attack against the Kamal Adwan hospital, also in the north. The Volker Turk, the human rights chief, recorded 136 attacks on 27 health facilities since the war in Gaza started. He said that Israel failed to substantiate many of its claims when it's saying that Hamas fighters were hiding in the hospitals. He said these claims were often vague and broad and appear to be contradicted by publicly available information. All these words by Volker Turk, the head of human rights office in Geneva.
All right, now, as well, more than 60 people are dead in Gaza since Friday. Is Israel ramping up its campaign as ceasefire talks are set to be resuming in Doha?
Well, it seems like attacks since the last days intensified, especially in the northern Gaza Strip. Also probably a way to put more pressure on Hamas in the ceasefire negotiations. As to the negotiations itself, in Doha, in Qatar, they restarted yesterday. We have Bassem Naim, an official of Hamas, saying again it's the seriousness of Hamas to go into these negotiations. He says this new talks will focus on agreeing a permanent ceasefire and a withdrawal from the Israeli forces from the Gaza Strip and the return of all the displaced people. On the other side, Netanyahu's office authorized a delegation from Mossad, from Shin Bet, and from the military to come to Doha. Hamas and Israel are accusing each other to add new conditions and to make things more complicated. On the other hand, there is really right now no words from the mediators itself, especially from the Qataris.
OK, but What's actually known about the main issues, we'll say, that have actually prevented a ceasefire agreement?
Well, two main sticking points. Hamas wants to have a permanent ceasefire, something Netanyahu always rejected, and Hamas wants to have a withdrawal, a total withdrawal of Israeli forces from the Gaza Strip. On the later, there are some reports that there is some pressure from the Qatari and the Egyptian mediators on Hamas to become more flexible when it comes to the Israeli withdrawal from the Gaza Strip, saying that there are assurances from the mediators that this will happen at a later point. But as I said, only reports about that.
Now, Kareem, we're of course at a time now of change in the United States, and what the implications would that mean for the rest of the world. How does Donald Trump becoming US president later this month factor into these talks?
Well, I think they're very contradicting vibes. On one hand, Netanyahu said Trump said that he wants to have the ceasefire concluded before he takes office on the 20th of January. On the other hand, I think Netanyahu hopes to get some more leverage once Trump is in office. He holds the card of the ceasefire in Gaza. He might want to get something about, for example, a delay of the withdrawal of Israeli troops from southern Lebanon, or some further U.S. acceptance of more territory occupied by Israel in the Syrian Golan Heights. Netanyahu might believe that he will get more as longer he waits until Trump is in office.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks, Kareem. Journalist Kareem Hari in Cairo.